So if I did my job right, we're recording now, Steve.
It said it started recording, so
Okay, so that's
it's a good
perfect. So we
sign.
know that. All right, now we could cheers. Cheers. What are you
Cheers, Greg.
drinking?
Um, well, it's a Greg Carson with no ice.
That's me. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. All right, so 2 milliliters. All right, so we have to tell our listeners the first episode of Bird Brag. So I'm Greg Carson.
And I'm Steve Scott.
So what I first need to tell people is that I have no credentials or authority to be on this podcast. So it's really, that means you have to carry all the weight of this.
I was afraid of that because I have maybe like a half of a credential.
We'll see about that. I'm going to say you have more than half of a credential for this. All right. So Bird Brag, what's the intent behind this podcast?
For me, the intent behind this podcast is to kind of bring animals and nature and birds to kind of a place where everyday people can experience them and understand them and maybe learn a little bit about them and have some fun while doing it.
Okay. See, and my goal is to help translate this for people who who might have fallen asleep during that sentence.
Yeah.
So that's about it. That's about all I could bring to it. Now we have to also be clear that we're not going to just stay with birds and nature. We might veer off into some other stuff at this point.
That seems like probably a good idea.
All right. Tell people a little bit about yourself though, Steve.
So I'm a wildlife biologist, and I work at a small wildlife refuge in Sacramento County. So probably most of what I have will be going from a California-centric standpoint, but wildlife and nature is one of my main interests. But I'm also into a lot of other things like sports. But of course, now with the quarantine, we're out of that. So maybe that's how this podcast was born.
I think it was definitely part of the impetus behind it. I got a lot of more free time on my hand these days.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we talked about, this is going to be an ever evolving thing as we go through it. But what we talked about is starting with educating me and the world on some of the wildlife that intrigues you. And we were going to start with like one specific animal, bird. It could be anything. But so what did we decide to start with today?
Well, we had talked about a fish, but since it is called Bird Brag, I figured we might want to start with a bird.
Oh, wait. So a pike minnow is not a bird?
No, that's a fish, Greg. That's a fish. But you know what?
So I mean, now that I say it out loud, it's two fishes in one, really. I don't know why. Yeah. I don't know. It was, I guess it was like thinking about a chickpea. A chickpea's not a chick. Is it a pea? And it's not really a pea either. So I thought pike minnow could be a bird at this point. Okay, so where did we net with what bird for Bird Brag?
Well, we have a couple options that I was thinking might be good. There's a black phoebe, which is pretty common in a lot of residential areas. So it's fairly relatable to people like you. You've probably even seen one. And but the other one I was thinking about would be a Swainson hawk, which is maybe a little more charismatic, but not as commonly sighted, on your everyday journeys.
These are both birds those are birds both that I might see in Sacramento, in Northern California.
Yes, for sure. The black phoebe's here year round, but the Swainson hawks they migrate south for the winter, so they're only here during the breeding season, pretty much.
I might need to know a little. Okay. How do you spell the Swainson sock?
Swainson's hawk.
Swainson. Oh yeah.
Not a
I
sock.
misheard you completely. No, I heard sock. I very clearly, distinctly heard sock.
Well, that might be a consequence of too many Greg Carsons.
Yeah. You know what else I'd like to tell the listeners is I'd love to tell them that it's Friday, 9 p.m. and we're drinking beers, but that would be a complete lie, as it's noon. It would be 9 in London.
It's not, yeah. Well, and that's good because maybe we should talk about the Swainson's hawk then, because it's named after a British naturalist. So
all right, let's do it.
He would be drinking right now.
Lay it on me. So why this bird? Why that bird? Why does it? And that's one of your faves, or just one that intrigues you?
They're all my favorites, Greg. It's really impossible to choose one, but it is one that takes up a lot of my time because it is a species that's threatened in the state of California, and so we have to do a lot of work for it at my refuge. But that's probably their wintering grounds in Argentina and some in Mexico, and now they're nesting here in Sacramento. And anytime the refuge where I work has construction projects, we have to monitor these nests and make sure there's no impact to the nesting birds. So a lot of my spring is spent looking at Swainson's hawks.
So how big, so give me a rough description of this bird and the listeners.
Yeah, so the Swainson's hawk is what they call, man,
you keep saying Swainson sock, I distinctly hear
the Swainson sock. So this hawk, it's in that category of hawks called buteos, which are kind of large soaring hawks. So like, your typical hawk that you see in a Western movie, the big, those are usually red-tailed hawks, but it's similar to a red-tailed hawk. So, they probably have a couple foot long wingspan and maybe weigh 1 or 2 pounds. But they look like a fairly big bird. A lot of birds are a lot lighter than they look, just because they have hollow bones and things like that, so they can fly. So even a big bird is only going to be a couple pounds.
Got it. And they work out a lot, so they look real fit.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then, that also depends on whether they've eaten a meal, because they tend to eat pretty big meals, and so they can hold that in their crop for a while before they digest it. So even a big meal could add a half a pound or so to their weight.
So
they're pretty interesting, though. I mean,
and what's the size again on something like that? Like how big am I? A hawk, I imagine, is big.
Yeah, so it's typically what you would imagine as a hawk if you're thinking of a hawk. So they're maybe 18 to 20 inches long, and anywhere from 1 to a big female would be maybe 3.5 pounds. So in hawks, typically the females are larger than the males. They have to lay the eggs and incubate them. So having a larger body size helps that be a little less stressful on the bird. So the females average bigger, and their wingspan is actually a little longer than I said before. It's probably closer to 4 feet long. And Swainson's hawks, since they are long migrants, have longer wings than like a red-tailed hawk would, that's of a similar body size. Those long wings kind of help them with that long distance migration. It helps keep them, it requires less energy for them to stay aloft, basically, when they're gliding on the thermals and things like that.
So when we talk about how big of a migration are we talking about? Like, it can get pretty cold in the.
So it's pretty big. So the Swainson's hawks breed all the way up into Canada and Alaska, and then the bulk of Swainson's hawks actually winter in Argentina. So it's pretty much northern tip of North America all the way down to the southern tip of South America. It's pretty amazing, and some of the flights that you see, they typically migrate over land, so that they always kind of have places to forage or places to come down when they land. And when they go through like the isthmus, that's a tough word to say, Greg, the isthmus of Panama, you can see hundreds and hundreds of them in the sky during migration at the same time. So it's pretty impressive sometimes. Another thing they'll do when you see big congregations, even in their breeding grounds, after the breeding season, when they kind of group together before they begin their migration south, they'll often follow agricultural equipment. So if you're mowing a field or disking a field, sometimes hundreds and hundreds of them following that equipment, waiting for, rodents, mice, and rabbits and things like that to be disturbed so they can come in for an easy meal.
So how much of the year are they in Northern California then? Are you watching these year round?
No, so they typically arrive in the Sacramento area in Central California, where I am, in early March, and then they'll leave probably August, September, somewhere in that range. There is a very small wintering population that stays in California year round, and it's actually pretty close. It's in kind of the lower parts of the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta, and you can see them there year round, but it's a fairly small population, and the bulk of them do migrate every year. So we're looking anywhere from like March to August, basically.
So just pure laziness, some stay and some leave?
Yeah. I mean, it's just like everybody else. You have some people that never leave their hometown and stay there all their life.
So what, and could you, like, from how far away could you spot this bird and know exactly what it is versus any other sort of hawk?
So in this area, it's not too bad, because typically during the summer, there's only going to be a couple other birds you might mistake it for. There's the red-tailed hawk, which we talked about a little bit ago, which is about the same size. They're maybe a little bigger. And the other bird you could mistake it from at longer distance would be a turkey vulture. But they do have characteristics that you can tell them apart, even just if you see their silhouette from a long ways away. Typically early in the spring, before I've seen a lot of them, before they have been here for a while, and I'm not thinking about them as much, I don't recognize them. But after you see them more and more, and you compare them to the red tails and turkey vultures in flight, you can actually tell them apart if you're experienced from probably a quarter mile.
Like coloration or just shape?
Just the shape mostly. Yeah, the coloration is different as well. Red tails typically are lighter underneath, and they have different kind of wing patterns. So a Swainson's hawk, typically the front edge of the wing, or what they call the leading edge, is lighter than the back edge of the wing. Whereas a red tail is pretty much light all the way underneath, except for that there's a dark mark at the leading edge. And the Swainson's hawk's wings are longer and pointier compared to their body, and they typically don't glide with their wings as flat. They're a little bit off of perfectly flat, and so that's another way you can tell them apart from a long distance. And then the turkey vultures, they're pretty dark underneath. They're quite a bit bigger, and you would probably only mistake them for those if you were really a long ways away from them.
All right. So are these guys in danger? Or are they?
So, like I said, in California considers them a threatened species. They used to be. There was a while when their populations had really started crashing, and as conservationists were trying to figure it out, they kind of went to their wintering grounds in Argentina, and there's pretty widespread insecticide use down there. And one thing about Swainson's hawks is during the breeding season, they eat a lot of mammals, like small rabbits and ground squirrels and things like that. But during the wintering season, they'll eat a lot of insects. So they'll eat grasshoppers and locusts and dragonflies. And so down on their wintering grounds, there was a lot of DDT use and other pesticides. And so these hawks remember I told you they would follow agricultural equipment and really take advantage of these kind of boons of prey populations. So when they'd apply this insecticide to the fields, as the grasshoppers were dying, these hawks would be eating, basically gorging on these dying grasshoppers, and it would kill the hawks. And so once they figured that out, conservationists were able to work with the farmers in Argentina and kind of curtail the use of some of the nastier insecticides that were causing these problems. And since then, they've actually done pretty well, and their populations are a lot higher than people thought. And but like I said, in California, we still treat them as a threatened species.
So you said that the name came from a British biologist or
a British naturalist.
Naturalist. Yeah. How does this bird live in Great Britain and that area?
It doesn't. But so I'm not sure the story about how exactly this guy got associated with this hawk. But there's also another bird called the Swainson thrush that I believe is also named after William Swainson. But kind of in the early taxonomy and naming these animals, obviously this country here had a lot of influence from England during our development. But it is primarily, or it is a Western Hemisphere species, only really found in North America in breeding, and then in South America in the wintering. Although there are sporadic records, it has been seen in Norway, but it's just like a vagrant bird that probably got lost or something like that.
Yeah, it made a left turn at Albuquerque and ended up in Norway.
Yeah, you don't want to turn left at Albuquerque.
Yeah, just like you pulled a Bugs Bunny, and all of a sudden the bird's there.
Yeah.
All right. So what are you? That's not how it works. I don't know. I don't know how you just all end up in Norway, but I'll let that one be. I've just magically ended up in Vegas too, so I guess I can't judge that bird. What is your role in trying to help these birds? And when you talk about, like, what does that mean?
Sure. So a lot of the work we do at my property is creating habitat that these birds can use. They need wide open grassland type habitats to forage in, that's close by mature riparian areas, or areas where there's big trees, so big valley oaks or cottonwoods that they'll make their nests in. And so we try to create some of those kinds of habitats. And then the other part of our work that helps to support this species is, like I mentioned earlier, during construction season, when the birds are nesting, that's kind of a point in their life when they need all the protection they can get. So the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has mandated a 1/4 mile buffer of any Swainson's hawk nest for construction activities for most projects. And that's a pretty long ways if you're trying to do construction activities. So the place I work is a large facility that's surrounded by all these open fields, and all the work goes on in that facility. It's completely ringed by Swainson's hawk habitat. So basically, anytime you try to do any work in that facility, there's going to be a Swainson's hawk nest within a 1/4 mile. So we'll negotiate with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and sometimes we're able to get those buffers reduced while we're kind of, and in exchange for that, we will monitor the nests and make sure that the construction activities aren't agitating the birds and that they don't leave the nest. And if that were to happen, then we would stop construction until the hawks came back and were more comfortable with the activity. Fortunately, these birds on average don't seem to be too disturbed by most of the construction activity. So for the most part, it's just kind of keeping an eye on them and making sure that there's no direct impacts and things like that.
All right, so change the subject. Have you been watching Korean baseball on ESPN?
So I haven't watched any of it yet. As you know, I'm a huge Korean baseball fan because my son lives in Korea, and so I've been to I think 3 Korean baseball games in the flesh. and my team is the Doosan Bears, which people are going to think obviously that I'm a bandwagon fan because they were the champions last year. But I became a Doosan Bears fan far before they were the current champions. So I just want to get that out there right now. Another interesting note is the manager for the Kia Tigers. He was born in my hometown, and I used to date his cousin. So that's kind of an interesting Korean baseball side note for me too.
Well, that is interesting note. So what's your hometown?
Bishop, California, which is in the Owens Valley, kind of in Eastern California.
That's a pretty deep connection right there. But you still haven't flipped on a game, even with this, your roots being. I mean, did you reach back out through Facebook and see if your ex was watching the game as well?
No, I didn't do that. I doubt that was happening. But I have not flipped it on, and part of the problem for me is and my wife will attest to this, is I'm kind of I have an early bedtime, Greg, because I have to get up early to, watch these Swainson Hawks and make sure I don't miss anything. So the Korean baseball games don't really start for the early games are 10 p.m. And it's pretty tough to commit to a baseball game that starts at 10 p.m. When you have to be up at 4:30 in the morning.
Take a Red Bull.
Is that all it takes?
That's all it takes.
A Red Bull?
All right. So what did we learn today? We learned that it's not a Swainson sock. It's Swainson's hawk. Did I say it right?
It's not a sock. You did.
Okay. And then we learned that poisoned grasshoppers nearly doomed them. We learned that isthmus is a real tough word to say.
Definitely.
And then we learned that that you have an early bedtime.
Yeah, not that I couldn't stay up to see the beginning of a Korean League game, but it's hard to start a game and then not finish it, and when you're not going to finish it, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't mind falling asleep during a game if I didn't plan on it.
Yeah. I mean, you're so vested in these teams, every player at this point, right?
Well, sure.
And the fans are just going crazy and screaming, so.
Except are they playing in front of fans? I haven't even watched a game.
They're not playing. That's what I was saying. They're not playing in front of fans.
Oh. Yeah, because normally that's the best part of a Korean game is the fans are off the hook.
Well, I wish American baseball was like Korean baseball. Cheerleaders. Did you see? So they didn't allow any fans, but they did allow the cheerleaders to be at the games. Yes, but the players didn't have to wear masks, but the cheerleaders had to wear masks.
Okay. So what's your team?
Oh, I wish I had a team. I need to really pay attention. I mean, any joke I would try to make would just be super racist or sound it because I wouldn't know, and it's unfair. So the Doosan Bears sounds like a fine team to follow. Do they have like American team names like Giants and Yankees, and like, is that the translate? Is it pretty, do they like, if they have the Dodgers, the name Dodgers come from Trolley Dodgers, obviously, in Brooklyn. So that wouldn't be any sort of Korean. Well, is there trolleys in Korea? I don't know, in South Korea.
So there is a Giants, I think. Samsung Giants. So that's one thing. Most of the teams are in Seoul proper, although there's like Incheon and a couple other close cities that have teams. So most of the teams are actually, or all the teams are named after their sponsors, like the Doosan Bears, Doosan Construction Equipment, the Samsung Giants, I think it is, the Kia Tigers. So Tigers, there's another one, but then, they're not all, because there's like the Dinos, and there's some other.
I saw the Dinos were the ones who I saw play on ESPN.
Okay. Oh, there's also the Twins. So yeah, I guess a lot of them are.
Yeah, I was curious.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I was inspired by it. So, that's pretty interesting. And so it's all crosstown. I mean, I would talk to Camden, your kid, about that, and it's a lot of crosstown rivals, right? Like neighborhood.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, sure.
So Samsung being I think it's a top 20 company in the world at this point. Do they have all the money in the world to buy all the best players?
I don't know how the salary cap or anything like that works in KBL. So I don't know, but that's interesting. One other thing though, talking about crosstown rivals. So it's kind of like a Lakers Clippers situation where Doosan and Samsung share the same stadium
cool.
for baseball. So when it's a game featuring both of those teams, that's the game to go to.
And how many games do they play? 81 games a year or 162 games a year, like American baseball? Is the season crushingly long like it is here?
You know what? You froze up about halfway through that, so I didn't hear any of that question.
So the question was, is the season 162 games a year and brutally long like it is in the States?
That is a good question. Yeah, that is the question.
Thanks.
Too.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that's a good question. All right.
Yeah.
So if we're lucky enough to have anybody listen to this and actually want to ask us a question or give commentary, what do they do?
Probably the best way at this point would be to just shoot an email over to birdbrag@gmail.com. The other thing they could do is if they want to shoot a message through Instagram, we have a pretty active Instagram account.
How many
I don't want to
followers
brag,
do we have
but it's pretty much viral at this point because I think as of this morning, it's probably changed already, but as of this morning, there was like 102.
What?
Yeah.
That's bird brag. Feel free to bird brag about that.
Well, I mean, who wouldn't, right?
Yeah. In the next episode, I think we're going to have to get into the genesis of the name Bird Brag and where that came from and that. So, but as of now, I think I'm going to let you go, Steve, and we're going to let this one sit where it lays. We got through your favorite hawk and Korean baseball in this episode.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Greg.
Oh, dude. No. Thank you for having me.
I'm not taking credit for this.
No, well, I'm not taking blame for it either. So, all right, everybody.
There's no difference in the 2 words.
It's probably true. All right, for Bird Brag, we're out. We need like a sound effect, like a bird sound.
Oh shoot, that's what I was gonna do. I was gonna play a recording of their call.
Oh,
you want?
Let's do that.
Too tough to cut that in?
No, it's great. If anyone's still listening at this point, they definitely deserve to hear the call.
Okay, well.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Okay, let me pull it up real quick. It won't take long.
And we're gonna have to have a quiz at the end of the season. Maybe you could quiz me on what, if I know which one's which.
Okay, let me put this close to the mic.
Yeah, that
here.
long pause.
Let me know how it goes. Ready?
Yeah,
so this is a recording that was made in Alberta.
Okay.
Pretty fierce.
That is pretty fierce. I don't want to mess with that.
No, they got a lot of talons and beaks and.
How big's the wingspan when it's making that noise?
It's usually at the full on 46 inches.
So almost 4 feet.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. We're calling this one episode 1.
All right. Sounds good.
Right.